representative of justice.
We've lost Dale Earnhardt.
It's time for me to move on.
Because of the HIV virus, I will have to retire.
Neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team.
The banishment for life of Pete Rose from baseball is the sad end of a saga.
I'm Bob Lee, and welcome to the headlines. In honor of ESPN's 25th anniversary, we're counting down the 25 biggest stories of the era as voted on by a panel of 100 who have chronicled this period of change. We're examining those headlines that at some point jumped off the sports page and onto the front page. Through the years, sports and gambling have long been fellow travelers. Millions, billions of dollars are bet annually on sports, legally and illegally. The key ingredient to the compelling nature of our games is that the results must be trusted. To break that trust is to breach the unwritten contract between the fan and the game. Tonight's headline is of an athlete who always pushed to the limits of himself and his sport, but in the end, he found himself pushed out.
The baseball commissioner's office says it is investigating what it calls serious allegations against Cincinnati Reds manager Pete Rose.
When it's time for me to comment, we'll make a comment.
Baseball's most prodigious hitter is now reported to have been a prodigious gambler as well, betting thousands of dollars a day.
John Dowd, a Washington attorney, a former Justice Department official, was recently hired by Major League Baseball to conduct the Rose investigation.
I did a lot of small things, cooperating with everybody. I mean, you know, tax records and checking accounts and that kind of stuff. The whole ball of wax. We're not trying to hide nothing.
Rose will be in the dugout managing the Reds on opening day. But the question is, for how long? The answer won't come until the commissioner's office completes its investigation.
Investigators in the Pete Rose case this morning reported they now have physical evidence linking the Cincinnati Reds manager to gambling on baseball.
Reports that experts have found his fingerprints and his handwriting on baseball betting slips has shaken the faith of all but his staunchest supporters.
I don't think he bet on baseball. I think he loves baseball too much to do that.
The accumulated testimony of witnesses together with documentary evidence and telephone records reveal extensive betting activity by Pete Rose.
I'm happy to look into the camera now and say I never bet on baseball. And I never bet on Cincinnati Red baseball.
Betting sheets turned over by former friend, convicted felon Paul Jansen, contained Rose's handwriting, according to an expert.
I started placing bets for Pete Rose on Major League Baseball and on the Cincinnati Reds in April of 1987.
A typical day would have Jansen calling Rose at home or in the Reds clubhouse and placing calls to Sportsline to see how the bets had done.
Other Rose bets, sources say, were made by Tommy Giosa, former friend indicted for drug trafficking and tax evasion.
No, Pete Rose never bet on baseball. I mean, I wouldn't know why he would bet on baseball.
Telephone records linked Rose, Jansen, and bookie Ron Peters, Dowd said, to betting on baseball.
If he called, he bet on the Reds every time that I can remember.
I met Ron Peters one time and never talked to him on the telephone.
Peters says he took Jansen's bets for Rose, $1 million over 2 years.
I just hope and pray that all of the stuff that we read isn't the truth.
Stress and pressure on Rose are building amidst a swarm of cameramen and new allegations each day.
You keep hounding me. You follow me to the parking lot, you follow me to the hotel, you follow me in a room, and it's no fun for me.
They went on sale today at the courthouse in Cincinnati. First public copies of baseball's report on Pete Rose.
I can give you an outline. There's 225 pages, and there's 2 paragraphs positive about me.
Rose's alleged gambling has been the subject of a 5-month investigation that has cast a dark cloud over baseball.
In his heart and his mind, he knows that he's innocent. I mean, he really believes it, so I can't say, no, Pete, you know, you should step down.
The Pete Rose story is making many Americans sad and many others very angry.
Kind of makes me mad because this guy that you look up to all these years may have cheated and betted on baseball.
People are going to forgive Pete whether or not he's guilty or not. High noon draws closer as the games go on.
I'm just like you. I'm waiting for an announcement and you're waiting for one.
Pete Rose huddled with his lawyers today, who say they'd like to cut a deal with baseball. His other legal team met today in Washington with Commissioner Bart Giamatti.
It would be absolutely unfair to the process if I were to make any comment on the matter.
Almost 40,000 streamed into Cincinnati's Riverfront Stadium today to watch what some predict will be hometown hero Pete Rose's last stand as Reds manager.
Just days before a federal court hearing, Rose and Bartlett Giamatti reached an agreement.
The banishment for life of Pete Rose from baseball is the sad end of a sorry episode. I am confronted by the factual record of Mr. Dowd, and on the basis of that, yes, I have concluded that he bet on baseball.
Well, regardless of what the commissioner said today, I did not bet on baseball. That's all I can say.
I played the game like Cobb because I was kind of tenacious. I wasn't scared to get dirty.
Pete wanted to win, and he absolutely would spit in your face in order to make it work.
ESPN25 is presented.
Last 25 years in sports, tune into ESPN Classic all summer long as ESPN celebrates its 25th anniversary.
It's unbelievable! Program celebrating ESPN25 Wednesday nights this summer on ESPN Classic.
Pete was a local boy in the city that prides itself, rightly, as the birthplace of professional baseball. Cincinnati was a very elemental city. Tough guys town. Good place to produce Pete Rose.
Part of the Pete Rose story was the Harry Rose story. You know, the game passed down to the son paying homage back to the father. Harry Rose was a great semi-pro football player until he was nearly 50. And Pete got this incredible physicality from his father.
From the time Pete was a year old, he was out in the backyard playing ball with him. When they'd come home and we'd be at the dinner table, he could have hit 3 grand slam home runs, but Dad dwelled on what he didn't do right. And it was always keep hustling.
One day, I remember we lost the game, and I was 0 for 4 that night. And this particular game, my dad was outside by my car, which was unusual. He said, let me ask you something. The second time up tonight, he said, when you hit that ball to the second base, did you run hard to first? And he says, listen, that's a direct reflection on me when you don't hustle on the baseball diamond.
Although he wasn't regarded as a promising prospect, Pete Rose was drafted out of high school in 1960 by his hometown Reds, for whom his uncle Buddy worked as a scout. Within 3 years, Rose had played his way up to the majors.
Don Blasingame was our second baseman, coming off an outstanding year the year before. Really well-liked by his teammates. And Pete came in the spring training and just literally ran Don Blasingame off the team with his hustle. The nickname Charlie Hustle came to him from Whitey Ford and Mickey Mantle that first spring training with the Reds.
No one had ever seen somebody, when he got walked, run down the first like nobody's business, you know what I mean? I said, this guy is really off his rocker.
Pete, being Pete, said, Charlie Hustle, that's me. He just refused to accept it as a derisive nickname.
Rose was voted the 1963 National League Rookie of the Year. In 1965, he began a 5-year stretch in which he totaled more than 1,000 hits and in the process won consecutive batting titles. But that initial success only further fueled his hunger.
Baseball. That's all that he ever wanted to do. That's all he ever talked about. I'm sure that's all he ever dreamed about when he was sleeping. Baseball. Baseball, baseball, baseball.
He was the everyman who maximized his ability, who seemed like the kind of guy where a dad could say to his kid, see that? That's the way the game should be played.
He's not the best baseball player I ever saw. But what he played every game like it was the 7th game in the World Series. And I've never seen anyone else do that.
He was pure baseball. And if I say 1927 to you, you might say, Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. He said, no, Ruth hit 60 home runs. Say 1941, you think Pearl Harbor. He said, no, 56-game hitting streak. DiMaggio, Williams bats .406. He was baseball straight through.
When you're playing baseball, you're one person. I call you a man that will do anything to win and actually
You call me an animal.
Well, I call you the animal, that's right.
Rose just so demonstrative in advertising that intensity. I could see him saying, yeah, I'll let him bean me here if it'll lead to the winning run and maybe fracture my skull. That's the kind of intensity he played with.
I played the game like Cobb because I was kind of tenacious. I wasn't scared to get dirty.
His competitive ferocity was evident at the 1970 All-Star Game in Cincinnati. With the score tied in the 12th inning, he came steaming toward home with the winning run.
Rose is on his way around, picked up by Otis. Rose is coming to the plate, throws a throw. He's in. It's all over. The National League wins.
How about these people say, well, you shouldn't slide hard like that. It's an all-star game. Those people are losers. What do you mean you shouldn't slide like that? Why shouldn't I play hard? Huh? I'm not supposed to try to win that game because it's an all-star game?
Pete wanted to win, and he absolutely would spit in your face in order to make it work.
And a fight breaks out. A fight breaks out. Pete Rose and Buddy Harrelson. Both clubs spill out of the dugouts.
The great thing about Pete Rose is that he's the fan as player. He's the guy sitting at the bar who says, God, if I could only do it, I'd go out there and I'd do it every day. He won over the fans with that ferocious force.
Off the field, Rose intuitively knew how to massage the media and use them to his advantage.
He was a great copy, and he made the reporters laugh. He made them feel like one of his own.
You're sober tonight, huh, Ron? That's great. You didn't wear the wine your ass to scratch your watch last night.
He understood the role of the media in promoting the sport. I think he understood the role of the media in promoting himself.
Rounds one to the right side. And he keeps the hitting streak alive at 44 in a row.
His 44-game hitting streak in the late 70s was the damnedest thing I've ever seen. He would give an interview to a guy that worked at a bi-weekly newspaper 15 minutes before the game.
Tired?
Tired?
Yeah, I'm getting tired of talking to you. That's
One of the joys of my career in baseball journalism were those days spent with Pete Rose talking about hitting.
Have you set some sort of a goal for yourself as to a number of hits you want to hit?
Base hit.
I had people who would say to me, all he cares about is hitting 300 and getting 200 hits and scoring 100 runs. He had a tremendous ego. He had tremendous confidence in his abilities as a hitter. And hell, he should have.
I've never been one that was short on confidence.
By October of 1980, Rose owned 3 World Series rings. He also had the distinction of being the only player ever selected as an All-Star at 5 different positions. But he regarded his individual accomplishments as mere baubles compared to the jewels he was pursuing.
He would write 3631 on his trademark on his bats, and that was a National League hitting record. And once he got that, then he put 4,000 on there. He was shooting for 4,000. Once he got the 4,000, he put 4191. He could see Ty Cobb's record whenever he picked up his bat.
2-1 pitch from Shaw. Center. There it is. Rose has eclipsed Cobb. That's number 4,192.
I can remember a standing ovation that lasted for about 12 minutes. I can remember the press box standing and applauding, which is something you hardly ever see. It was just a fantastic night.
On August 17, 1986, 2 years after Rose became player manager of the Reds, Charlie Hustle took the final at-bat of his 24-season career. But while he continued to manage the Reds, he couldn't bring himself to officially retire.
Most athletes, when they get older, become more modest. You learn humility as you lose your skills. But everything big happened to Pete really late in his career. He got the huge multi-zillion-dollar free agent contract when he was 37. He started catching Cobb when he was in his 40s. His hitting streak that made national headlines came late in his career. So when most people are learning modesty, Pete was learning vanity.
In 1987, he had just finished his playing career, but he wasn't comfortable with that. And in my mind, he was bitter. Pete couldn't really come to terms with not playing anymore.
The theory on why Rose bet on games was that managing wasn't enough. He had to have something else going with the game.
I met Richie Ashburn. He says, "You can't believe this guy." He says, "I've never seen anything like him. He is the most obsessive person I've ever seen." He said, "It doesn't make any difference whether it's playing baseball, sex, gambling, whatever. He does everything absolutely full out." He said if Pete drank, he'd have been an alcoholic when he was 16 years old.
Pete not only gambled, but Pete stiffed bookies.
Pete was into them for at least $500,000. They essentially had a mortgage on the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, and he couldn't pay that mortgage off.
Pete came to baseball a gambler, a horse gambler. Very early on, a sports gambler. But what was different about Pete is that Pete's gambling habit grew and grew and grew, and it became his passion other than baseball.
Pete Rose was not a secret gambler. That was probably his undoing. What you saw is what you got.
It was impossible to be around Pete and not think that he had more than a casual interest in other sports.
He loved to bet the horses, the dogs, basketball, pro in college, football, pro in college.
I remember it was 1985. Pete Rose was chasing the hit record, right? And so I said, "Pete, man, can I spend some time with you? Maybe come over to the house." He goes, "Yeah, come over tonight." And I remember coming into his house, and he goes right to the huge satellite dish. And he's like, "Damn Canucks, why can't they play any defense? What is wrong with the Chicago Bulls, for crying out loud?" And he was hitting his head. And I'm thinking, this guy is a huge sports fan. You know, instead of thinking what any real reporter would have thought, which was, this guy's got a bet on every game.
One of the reasons he bet on baseball is because he was so good at it. He lost so much on the other sports. He was uncanny when it came to baseball.
Pete Rose betting on baseball was just a matter of arrogance. He thought he was so big he could do anything.
When we walk in the clubhouse, there was that sign, "Do not bet on this game." I can remember Pete going by the sign, looking at the sign, and went, "Yeah, gig, gig, gig," and walk in kind of laughing.
In February of 1989, 1 month before Sports Illustrated published accusations Rose had bet on baseball, outgoing Commissioner Peter Ueberroth summoned the hit king to New York.
When he was called in to Peter Ueberroth's office, there were pictures of all these great ball players. He said to Ueberroth, "You got all these pictures on the wall. Why ain't my picture up there?" He was giving some kind of message like, you better be careful of who you're messing with here because you're messing with history.
Pete Rose came to me in my last 6 months of being Commissioner of Baseball. I sat with him and tried to convince him that the facts are there, that you're guilty. And the best thing you can do is say you're sorry. You will be penalized by me, and you will have a chance to be back in the game if you behave properly at some time in the future.
That was his first fatal mistake. At that point, he should have said to Ueberroth, "Yeah, I did this." And I believe that Ueberroth would have taken care of this quietly.
But Rose defiantly dug in. Ueberroth responded by appointing John Dowd, a former U.S. Justice Department attorney, to investigate.
The phone rang, it was Sparciamati. Apparently they'd had a meeting with Pete, and he said it was a cloud on the game and he wanted to get it over with as soon as possible.
Pete not only gambled, but Pete stiffed bookies. This went on for years and years and years and years until the bookies that he stiffed were mob-connected bookmakers. When he didn't pay off them, that was a different story.
Pete was into him for at least $500,000. They essentially had a mortgage on the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, and he couldn't pay that mortgage off. It was deadly serious.
From February into May, Dowd compiled a 225-page report that he submitted to Bart Giamatti, who had replaced Uberoth as commissioner in April of 1989.
Marge Schott, who owned the Cincinnati team, was a tight-fisted woman. She hated wasting money, so she had the operator keep track of all outgoing calls from the clubhouse once the players went in there at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Pete didn't know that.
The operators, they would write in the names. So it'd be Paul Jansen to Pete Rose or Pete Rose to Jansen. Then you'd go to Jansen's phone record and see it went to Peter's. And that's when we came away with the little rhyme, home or away, night or day. Pete's placing bet through his middle guy, and you can just watch the phone traffic.
The Dowd report and the 2,000 pages of supporting evidence is damning. If you go to any criminal court in the country and sit through a case, you will see people convicted day after day after day on 1/10 of the evidence that baseball had against Pete Rose.
3 months after receiving the Dowd report, Commissioner Giamatti banned Rose from baseball for life.
I am confronted by the factual record of Mr. Dowd, and on the basis of that, yes, I have concluded that he bet on baseball.
Rose signed an agreement allowing him to apply for reinstatement after 1 year.
It's a compromise. It's not a victory or it's not a defeat. It's an agreement by 2 parties.
I signed the agreement because all I was looking for was there'll be no finding that I bet on baseball.
Pete took the bait. He was so desperate not to admit his gambling addiction, so desperate not to admit that he bet on baseball, that he would do anything not to confess.
The day he was banned from baseball, he was on cable television hawking his signature.
I don't think today's ruling has anything to do with me making the Hall of Fame. I'm looking forward to being reinstated into baseball after a year.
Nobody could point out to him, this doesn't look good. If you really are sorry that you've been banned from baseball, don't go out and just rub more salt in the wound.
With tragic timing, Giamatti died of a heart attack just 8 days after banishing Rose.
Believe it or not, I like Giamatti. I had several meetings with Bart Giamatti about the game of baseball. We cared about the game. We worried about the game. The only difference, I cared about the game a hell of a lot longer than he did.
Rose's troubles intensified. The IRS began an investigation for income tax evasion. He countered with an appearance on the Phil Donahue Show, offering a confession.
What do you understand a gambling disorder to be?
Well, I always thought if you had a gambling disorder that you had to gamble every day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. And my disorder is a little different because I have a problem, or had a problem, when I had a lot of time and nothing to do with my energy.
I asked him, why did you go on Donahue and say that? His answer was, my lawyer told me that the federal judge in my tax case was probably going to be watching and that this would reflect favorably on me.
Rose's grab for sympathy failed. On July 19, 1990, he pleaded guilty to income tax evasion and was sentenced to 5 months in a federal prison in Marion, Illinois.
I stood in that courtroom in Cincinnati. I was there that day. I mean, to see him about 2 blocks from Pete Rose Way, hear the judge say that he was going away, was one of the saddest things I've ever seen.
Rose was released from prison in January of 1991. 1 month later, the 12-member Hall of Fame Board of Directors voted unanimously, saying that any player banned from baseball could not appear on the ballot for enshrinement. Nonetheless, in the next election, Rose did receive 41 write-in votes. He had other supporters as well.
If the new commissioner, whoever he is, doesn't fix that injustice, thereby enabling Pete to get into the Hall of Fame where he rightly belongs, if anybody does, then baseball ought to set up a Hall of Shame and let the commissioner be the first one voted in.
People still don't understand, why shouldn't he be in the Hall of Fame? If you want to say that the gambling jeopardizes the sanctity of the game, that's one thing. But the Hall of Fame honors accomplishment. And no matter what he did, the accomplishment on the field was unparalleled.
Rose was insistent and persistent, denying he had ever bet on baseball.
Your position still that you did not bet on baseball?
Sure. I mean, my position is this, that when I signed the agreement with the commissioner's office, it's a done deal.
He got into a cycle of denial, and he kept digging himself a deeper hole.
You say you never bet on baseball.
That's correct. People think you're guilty if you say no comment.
After a certain amount of time, I don't think he started believing the lies, but I don't think he knew how to start telling the truth.
It's so impossible for him to admit that he gambled on baseball. Because it disgraces everything that he really does believe. He can hardly believe that he did it.
This is simply a case where the man broke the cardinal rule of the game and then didn't have the quality that he spoke about most and exhibited most, guts. And in the end, he didn't have the guts to do what was right.
We don't want any part of anybody that ever gambled on the game of baseball in this Hall of Fame.
I played with Pete, and I like Pete, and I think Pete has been great for baseball. But what he did was wrong.
Rose by any other name wouldn't be worth the trouble, but Pete Rose has been invited back to baseball, if only for a night.
Commissioner Bud Selig announced in August of 1999 that if Rose were voted onto the All-Century team, he would be permitted to attend the on-field ceremony during the World Series.
When our people came to me, they were really trying to determine what the fans thought, who are the greatest players of the 20th century. It's really quite unfair to keep his name off that list.
He holds the Major League record for most career hits, 4,256. Pete Rose.
Are you willing to show contrition, admit that you bet on baseball, and make some sort of an apology to that effect?
Not at all, Jim, not at all. I'm not going to admit to something that didn't happen.
I was just asking the questions that I thought were relevant, and the questions that needed to be asked, questions that should have been answered forthrightly and honestly.
Pete, those who will hear this tonight will say that you have been your own worst enemy and continue to be. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I'm surprised you're bombarding me like this.
Jim Gray did him a huge favor. He put Pete back in the news, and he made Pete the victim.
3 years later, Rose received special dispensation again prior to Game 4 of the 2002 World Series. He was allowed inside a Major League ballpark as part of a memorable moment celebration.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pete Rose.
The few times he's been allowed to appear in a stadium, the response has been overwhelming. That was not lost on Bud Selig. That's a major reason why he did even think to consider Pete's application for reinstatement.
Selig wanted to play it both ways. I think really he was getting ready to reinstate Rose because he needed something that was very popular. He would have gotten terrific praise from the public, but he would have been wrong.
Bart Giamatti said that Pete Rose had to reconfigure his life. No one really knew what that meant, except we all suspected it meant, Pete, you've got to stop gambling. Well, Pete hasn't stopped gambling.
Charlie Hustle's reported trip to Las Vegas casinos where gambling is legal is not helping his bid for reinstatement.
Even during the World Series in 2002, when he had just had conversations with Bud Selig about trying to restore himself and was at a point where he really needed to be conscientious about his public perception. He was sitting in Caesar's Palace betting $5,000 a game on football.
He certainly seemed to alienate people by showing up at card shows at Cooperstown. I think he angers people that way, so he hasn't always been smart.
In January of 2004, Rose, now 62 years old, appeared on ABC's Primetime to promote his soon-to-be-released autobiography, Pete Rose, My Prison Without Bars.
Did you bet on baseball?
Yes, I did, and that was my mistake, not coming clean a lot earlier.
Did you bet on your own team?
Yes.
A lot of fans suddenly feel like, well, I feel like an idiot. I've been backing you for 14 years, and now you tell me you were lying with a straight face the entire time.
Anybody could tell that he wasn't really sorry for what he did. He was still angry about how much money he lost by being kicked out of the game. How everybody cost him all this money, how Bart Giamatti screwed him over. He blames a lot of people, and I don't think he ever blames himself.
He was more sympathetic before, because on some level, there was that plausibility that maybe he is telling the truth. Now he has nothing.
Many people were offended by the timing of the book's release, which was moved up from its originally scheduled publication date. The book hit stores and stole the headlines just 2 days after the election to the Hall of Fame of Dennis Eckersley and Paul Molitor.
I thought the timing of releasing his book was not the right time. I was a little disturbed about that more than anything else.
The sentiment changed, and that's when I believe Bud Selig changed his look on this and said, this is not what the people want anymore. Basically, I was right all along. Reinstating him is not a good idea.
Rose faces a hard and fast deadline to qualify for the Hall of Fame with the writers. His eligibility to appear on their ballot expires in December of 2005. After that, should he be reinstated, Rose's cause would be considered by the Veterans Committee.
If Pete thinks he's above the law, then he's wrong. The integrity of the game is impugned. There's a lot of Hall of Famers who are totally against him. We don't want any part of anybody that ever gambled on the game of baseball in this Hall of Fame. The hustle on the field was all right. Love that. But you're thinking now about a hustle. You're thinking about a gambling hustle.
He has more hits than anybody in the world, so if the Hall of Fame truly does celebrate the history of baseball, which I believe it does, he's got to be in the Hall of Fame.
Don't ever think that you're going to tell me that you're going to take away what he did as a player and what he did for this game.
I played with Pete, and I like Pete, and I think Pete has been great for baseball, but what he did was wrong.
It's a very sensitive issue in a lot of places. There's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons, and I understand that, but this is a judgment that I'll have to make. Only time will tell.
Eventually, all that's going to be left is 4,256 hits and the Dowd report. And there will be some people who think that the numbers are what matter, and then there are other people who are going to say the crime is what matters. There's always going to be a split of opinion on the subject of Pete Rose.
The issue may not be how Rose will be remembered, rather, why his quest for the Hall of Fame was argued so vehemently, and whether that debate will wither and eventually die.
I think part of the continued fascination with Pete Rose is this notion that he represents sports as it used to be, sports as it should be, sports as we wish it would be.
It's a sadness that why? You had everything. You were one of the greatest players ever. You were going to go to the Hall of Fame without question. Why would you bet on baseball?
I think the time has come to ignore Pete Rose. He had his opportunity to come clean about everything earlier, and he didn't take advantage of that opportunity, so I don't think that baseball owes him anything.
I think the byword of the 80s that came from the movie Wall Street is greed is good, greed works. Pete totally bought into greed is good, and to some degree in his case it was, but in the end he fell in love with it and it really disintegrated him.
Your character, like your shadow, is always with you. You can't get away from it. And once you lose your character, you've lost it all.
Coming up, I'll be joined by Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, and we'll discuss whether Pete Rose's confession should open the door to the Hall of Fame.
The headlines continue on ESPN25. I'm Bob Lee as we continue taking a look at the top stories of the past 25 years. Each week at this point, I'm joined by Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon. And the national obsession, which has been Pete Rose, it's been on everyone's lips, a national barroom debate for 15 years. What did we learn about him from his recent admission/apology?
That he is so stubborn that it changes a lot of our minds as to whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame. I've been one of those people, Bob, who thinks they should put it on his plaque, but Pete Rose has to be in the Hall of Fame if the Hall of Fame is to have legitimacy. The numbers, the performance over 20-plus years merit it. However, when he just lied time after time, refused to put forth any legitimate apology, I turned.
It just seemed this time like it was the ultimate hustle by Charlie Hustle. I'm in the same camp as Wilbon. It's undeniable that he deserves to be for what he did on the field. Not as a manager, what he did on the field, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And I said this 1,000 times. But guys my age and guys Wilbon's age and guys your age, they sit and vote on Pete Rose going into the Hall of Fame, the baseball writers. And he lied and repeatedly lied each time for greater effect. I never did it, I never did it, I never did it. Then while selling a book, he said, I did it. I did it. Well, the reverberation of that will not sit well with people who even liked him. I mean, if you tracked his poll numbers, and he was a heroic figure. I mean, when Bud Selig introduced him at a ballpark, people went wild, and that embarrassed Bud Selig and embarrassed all of baseball. You track those numbers now, they have plummeted since his preposterous admission that, yeah, I lied and I lied and I lied, but now I'm telling you the truth, and now I did it.
And you don't know what to believe if you believed him before. Tony, that's a great thing about introducing him to ballparks. Because now I think when it happens again, after the latest lie, or what I presume to be a lie, it's going to flip-flop.
I don't think that Bud Selig ever wanted to, after the first time he introduced him, he didn't want to have to introduce him again because he was the most popular guy in the world. Now, there has been no introduction since the admission that he bet on baseball. I am still troubled by this, though, in this regard. I don't think getting in the Hall of Fame is like winning the Nobel Peace Prize. I think his career merits him being in the Hall of Fame. You put on the plaque, he admitted he bet on baseball. He broke the cardinal rule, the rule that's in every clubhouse. But I still don't see how you legitimately keep him out, even for admitting that he bet while being a manager, and even if you think he bet while doing the games, look at his numbers. I mean, how do you keep him out?
Here's how, Tony. I'm one of the people who thinks for every reason you just stated, he ought to be in. But
have the guilty plea on the plaque.
But the passion that came along with defending Rose and pursuing this line of reasoning, that's gone. Okay. So if you don't keep him out, you don't lobby anymore that he has to be in.
But look at the fullness of his career. There was a time in baseball when he was knocking guys out at the plate, when he was getting hits like Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays did, but without any kind of ability like they had. There was a period of time when baseball put him out and said, we are prouder of him than we are of anybody else in baseball. So is it right for him to take, in the latter part of his life, this tremendous fall and all that stuff be ignored? He has been a great player, one of the 20 greatest of all time.
Why do we care so much? Why is this such an emotional topic in our barrooms?
Because the baseball's Hall of Fame is the only Hall of Fame that people think they can sit and justify.
Numbers matter.
Well, then it is the Nobel.
But beyond that, it's Pete Rose. because Pete Rose touched this chord in people because he did not have the great natural gifts of Willie Mays or Ken Griffey Jr. or Mickey Mantle. He didn't have any of that. And he went out there and he stuck his face in the dirt. He had the head first slide. He was willing to bleed for you all the time. And he touched something in American sports fans that made him special beyond almost everybody else in the period of time he played.
You know what? He undid some of that goodwill. He unraveled it. I mean, it's not like somebody else did it to him. I mean, he unraveled it. The only thing I would take exception to there, Tony, is that it happened late in his life. What we don't know is when Pete, we know Pete was always at the horse races, always at the track.
It's legal in America?
It is legal, but we don't know when he started betting, and we know we're not going to get an honest answer.
And we know that people that know addiction will tell you that if you're addicted, you have an advantage. You will play that advantage if you have that addiction when you're gambling.
I'm just saying that when you evaluate the numbers, when you look at the numbers,
it's a no-brainer.
He's got to go in.
Except the rule is sitting on the clubhouse wall. All right, well, the application sits on Bud Selig's desk. Gentlemen, thank you very much. In just a second, we'll get perspective on this from the actor Tom Sizemore on the headlines as we continue on ESPN25.
ESPN25 is presented by McDonald's. Bud Light. Fresh, smooth, real. Bud Light. It's all here. T-Mobile. Get more minutes, more features, more service. And Toyota. Get the feeling.
Before we close out this edition of The Headlines, some final thoughts now from someone outside the world of sports, the actor Tom Sizemore.
For an actor, playing Pete Rose is like getting in touch with yourself as a 2-year-old. You're not searching for nuance. You're trying to express naked emotion. You're looking for ways to demand attention. Grab all the toys. Bang into people without saying you're sorry. To scream at the top of your lungs, I want. You don't get 4,256 hits without really wanting them badly. Without acting like a terrible 2-year-old with both hands grabbing. Pete was never cool. It was no compliment when Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford dubbed him Charlie Hustle. It was sarcasm. They understood right away that Pete didn't care if you saw him sweat, sensed he was hungry, just so long as you got out of his way. It didn't matter if he was trying to stretch a single into a double, snag a babe, or break the bank. It was all about winning. The gambling was part of that. Some people rationalized it as an aspect of his competitive spirit, his need for action. But it was also a disease for which a grown-up has to take responsibility. In that sense, Pete never grew up. That doesn't absolve him from betting on baseball. He should be punished for putting the integrity of the game in danger, but maybe not banned for life. He did go out there and get those 4,256 hits, and that's worth something. He needs to be in the Hall of Fame. You must agree with that. Pete and I bet you do.
Thanks for watching this edition of The Headlines. I'm Bob Lee.